So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this panel event. The Daylight Academy is an international membership organisation connecting scientists, architects, and other professionals with a strong interest in daylight-related topics, encouraging creativity and innovation through interdisciplinarity, disseminating the knowledge among specialists and the public. So as an audience member, if you'd like to contribute, please write questions in the Q&A tool. All participants can comment and like questions, and questions with more likes have higher chances to be selected by the moderator. And just to let you know, we will answer the questions right at the end of the presentations, so you won't be forgotten. Thank you for joining this interdisciplinary panel to consider the impact of seasonal light on human behaviour, health and well-being, how light affects our perception of place, and the role of creative practice in understanding these relationships. I am Jo Joelson, an artist and researcher, currently undertaking a programme of research concerned with bringing into dialogue a wide range of practices to expand our understanding of light and its relationship to society and culture. Natural light is not only desirable for humans and other than humans, it is a biological imperative. Due to the electrification of light and its proliferation, natural cycles of light and dark are increasingly being disrupted in ways that impact our health and well-being. I hope that by sharing our projects and thinking today, we will help to drive a shift towards more ethical ecologies of light for the benefit of humanity and nature. It's been a real pleasure to work collaboratively with the Daylight Academy to curate this webinar and to open a dialogue with such esteemed researchers and practitioners. I am delighted to introduce the panel, who will each present their work shortly. We have with us today the Living with SAD research team, Professor Hester Parr, University of Glasgow, Professor Hayden Lorimer from the University of Edinburgh, and Scottish-based artist-poet Alec Finlay. They will discuss the co-design of the Wintering Well programme and introduce the poetic manifesto Light is a Right. Dr. Katrin Anna Lund is a social anthropologist and professor in the Department of Geography and Tourism at the University of Iceland. And Katrin will share her thinking on landscape as a vital agent in research, with a special emphasis on walking and narratives. We will conclude the webinar with a discussion amongst the panel and take questions from the audience. So I'm going to begin with a very brief introduction to the subject and study of seasonal light as experienced through some of my research and field work during residencies and projects. These explorations into the observance, measurement, and recording of natural light in specific locations have influenced more recent research and thinking about the importance of daylight and daylight justice, and why access to natural light should be a moral right for all species. You'll hear a little bit more about this topic from Alec Finlay towards the end of the session. An early collaborative project, Polaria, involved a period of field work in northeast Greenland, studying and recording 24-hour daylight over the month of August and the onset of polar darkness. The project developed out of an experience of nature, both subjective and scientific, thinking about the ways in which we encounter nature phenomenologically and how as artists we represent landscape. In the remote wilderness of northeast Greenland, we used instruments to record and capture the light and bodily responses to the light. We used a spectroradiometer, a sophisticated light meter, to measure the wavelengths of light over the period of a month. The light's impact on the body was measured simultaneously using biomonitors. In the field, we were freed from the daily rhythm of the rising and setting sun. There was a different kind of rhythm, the pattern of the sun circling overhead, with its arc getting lower each day until by the end of the month, it was visible just above the horizon line, a line of red light bleeding into the sky above. From the recorded data, we constructed a virtual daylight chamber. Visitors to the gallery were invited to interact with the work, experiencing a simulation of the natural light we experienced in the field. We were driven by the possibility of mediating an experience of place through virtual light or the simulation of daylight, and became interested in research into the biostimulation effects of full spectrum polarized light. Some years later, between 2016 and 2019, I undertook a number of residencies in Iceland researching an idea, geographic light, and involving field work, writing, and filmmaking. I refer to the idea of geographic light as location and place specific, and as being inherent within certain practices. In From Light to Dark, Daylight, Illumination and Gloom, Tim Edensaw considers how special qualities of daylight foster a sense of place and inspire distinctive artistic representations and cultural practices of place, exploring how we might think about geographies of daylight, artificial illumination and darkness. In summer and winter 2016, 2 connected residencies at the Skaffell Centre for Visual Arts in Iceland facilitated experimental filmmaking in response to the extremes of light and dark, and the ways they are experienced personally, socially, and culturally in the remote town and community of Seyðisfjörður in East Iceland. We relied upon interactions within the community, seeking local knowledge and embedding personal stories into the works. Our experiences, interactions, and responses to place were translated into a series of works titled Short Films About Light and Dark, and included 3 film works, Hull, Shadow Work, and The Darkest Day. The town of Seyðisfjörður is accessible by land only via a mountain pass. In the winter months, the sun doesn't rise above the mountains that encircle the town, and so it remains completely out of sight. The weak available light only increased if there is a snowfall. The impact of the surrounding mountains on the lived experience of light in the community was often spoken about. There were discussions about the disappearing light of dusk and the feeling of time being suspended that characterized the town in autumn with its dramatic loss of daylight. Local artists describe this loss. Each day in October has 8 minutes less daylight than the one before. The sun is slower each day to crest the mountains which ring the fjord until mid-November, when it no longer rises above the mountains and the town experiences only indirect light until February. The cold, dark days keep people indoors most of the time. A local designer talked about the nostalgic feeling that comes with winter darkness, how life is simpler with widespread use of candles in the home during this time, and the intimacy this creates. The local librarian talked about the annual cultural festival, Days of Darkness, a celebration of the arrival of winter, held during the first 2 weeks of November, when local residents gather to embrace the increasingly long winter nights as the sun disappears behind the mountains. All lights in the town are switched off for the torch parade, which winds its way around the town, and people take it in turns to tell ghost stories. Various other events take place and include bread baking classes, artists' open studios and workshops, and usually a grand finale, the Northern Lights Party. When local artist Jökull was asked to think about winter, he said, "The harsher the season, the more alive we are. But it is not all about darkness. Icelandic winter twilight envelops everything in shifting shades of blue. This time between night and day is called the blue hour, where the colour of the town and the mountains reflect the sky above. A surreal scene in which the only colour that exists is blue, a shade that shifts the world into a state that's neither quite awake nor asleep." Just as the long winter days are welcomed, the return of the sun 3 months later on 20th of February is greeted with solar kaffi, when family and friends get together for coffee and pancakes with cream, jam and sugar. From then on, the days get longer until midsummer, and once again, the fjord is illuminated in the midnight sun. These intimate interactions with people and place helped to build understanding of the local environment and the ways in which life is affected by seasonal light. Building a vocabulary of light specific to place advances my ways of thinking about daylight and darkness by way of its impact on the perception of time and its personal and societal impact. So now I am going to invite Dr. Katrin Anna Lund to introduce her research and work.
Thank you, Jo. And thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this webinar. I'm going to stay in Iceland with my paper, and I'm going to be in Reykjavik. My paper is very anecdotal, and I will invite you to go on a little walk with me. A walk I did earlier this month in November. But my paper, I decided to give it the title, Walking with Light, Shifting Landscapes. It is the beginning of winter in Iceland. On Saturday, actually, it was what we call the first day of winter, which is something that comes from the olden days. We used to have only 2 seasons, winter and summer, and the first day of summer is in April, usually in a very cold weather and no sense of summer at all. So it is the beginning of the winter in Iceland now, and we are heading into a period of very limited light. Not as limited as the people in Seyðisfjörður have, because there is never a total darkness in Reykjavik. We are provided with, by nature, with 2 or 3 hours of daylight over the darkest period. Now, when I say this like that, it reveals how we tend to think about light and darkness at opposites, winter versus summer, with the transitional periods of autumn and spring in between. I do, however, like Jo was hinting at, want to claim that all seasons are transitional. In fact, full of constant movements of light and darkness, or ever-changing lightscapes, like Billy and Sørensen call it. Still, I cannot deny that both in the spring and autumn in Iceland, the transitions seem to happen so fast that one cannot but notice the difference each and every day brings in. I am, for example, strongly reminded that autumn is heading in when stepping onto my balcony at night, only to find myself wrapped up with Aurora Borealis, which tells me that we have entered the period when it has become dark enough to actually visualize them. That is when they are on display. Around the same time, one becomes increasingly aware of seasonal transitions, as light starts playing illuminating shifts and colors get more vivid as the days get shorter. One really learns to appreciate the constant choreography of lightscapes in the surrounding landscape. What I will follow on in this talk is to examine how these choreographies, or what I want to call choreographies, create atmospheres that need to be examined in relation to how different modern human actors take part in them. Actors like weather, earthly materials such as water, stones, vegetation, and man-made structures, just to name some, animals, as well as humans. As anthropologist Tim Ingold points out, light in itself is not an object of perception. It is rather that we see with light. And I want to add, as we are touched with light. As Tim Edensor has noted, everybody's seeing involves movement, intentions, memory, and imagination. It's about being wrapped up in ever-moving entanglements and ever-shifting atmospheres. But what do I mean when talking about atmosphere? As Tim Ingold has pointed out, scientific thought has separated earthly beings, human and non-humans, away from atmospheres to leave them in the world of weather. Atmosphere in that context is a gaseous envelope that surrounds our planet. Following philosopher Gernot Böhme, Ingold, on the other hand, wants to ground the concept of atmosphere with sensory experience, because in reality, life is as it happened on the ground. On the ground is where earth and sky entangle, or in experienced atmospheres of shifting lightscapes. To capture these atmosphere is about being entangled with them. And as he points out, one does not see light, rather one sees with light, just to emphasize that. And as a journey, I shall take you on, as a journey that I will take you on, demonstrate, to see with light creates moments of stillness that are nevertheless filled with movements. I want to take you out walking on a route that is one of my leisure walking routine close to my home in Reykjavik, and meet my friend, the great oak, but not just any. This one is made from aluminium by the Icelandic artist Ólöf Nordal, and is now owned by the Icelandic Museum of Art. It is standing on a rock by the seashore in about 3 kilometers distance from my home. So walking to meet and greet it and going back again gives me about 6 kilometers of brisk walking. In other words, it's my landmark. And even though on occasions that I walk further, I always feel the need to greet it in one way or another. I am somehow drawn to it, and the reason why is that it gives me a perspective that reflects the atmosphere and its ongoing choreographies performed by earth, water, and air, as well as paths, people, and an iPhone, to name just a few. However, the main actor is always the light, how it reflects on and brings forth different features. In that way, it narrates the surrounding landscape. It tells stories about seasonalities, transitions, movements, and in that way brings the moment of being into perspective. To start with, I want to read this quote from Tim Ingold, that illuminating converging on a point is structured, that the structures carries information that specifies features of the environment. Unstructured light, however, specifies nothing. What we see then is emptiness. But what is emptiness? In recent writings of mine, I have pointed out that space that is empty because it is full of something, chaotic and messy, that needs to be ordered. Features in the landscape help to order the emptiness. And for me, the great oak emphasizes the structure, at least at the moment I meet it, because of the relations I, at least, imagine I have established with it. But who is the great oak? It is a replica of an extinct species, but the last two of its kind were killed in 1844 in a small island called Eldey, about 13 kilometers off the coast of Reykjanes Peninsula in southwest Iceland. They were killed to be sold to a foreign collector who offered good payment. The replica of the bird, where it stands by the coast, turns in direction towards the island and gives the impression that it is staring at the place of the crime. It is also made from aluminium, metal for which Icelanders have sacrificed a great deal of nature to produce. Although conscious about the artist's intentions, for me, it is much more than that. It means much more than that. Although I find difficult to figure out exactly what. I never encountered it. Yeah, I never, I never encountered it in the same way. Philosopher Björn Thorsteinsson describes his encounters with a colony of great seabirds, the great seabirds, gannets, and his feeling of being on the margins of another world as the gannets did not care about his presence. It is the same about the orc and me. It does not care. It is in his own world, which goes beyond the reality in which I am, and it is not to be interrupted. As such, it resembles stillness and endurance, which in a sense contradicts the fate of extinction, its fates of extinction, as it looks towards its former habitat. The sense of stillness becomes even stronger as it exaggerates the ever-moving environment, or the ever-moving choreographies of earth, water, air, and not least the light. Although it is always the same where it stands, it is never the same. How the light reflects the water, how sky and earth sometimes unite and entangle in the forms of colors and shadows, gives the orc different moods, and somehow I always try to connect to it by consciously taking part in the choreography. This I do sometimes by only stopping briefly and showing it the respect of looking at it and taking in the mood of the day. Sometimes I take photo or two, but there are also days when I spend some time taking in the surroundings and let the bird inspire me to notice all kinds of magical displays of lightscapes in the surroundings. This happened, for example, on October 13th this year. It was a beautiful day with a temperature just above zero, and the magical light I felt I was wrapped up with as I was walking in the direction to the oak. The autumnal transitions were felt vividly that day, not the least in how the colors of the sky got reflected on the water, which made material structures by the coast more apparent. I took the phone out and snapped the photo, only to realize the camera sensed the environment from that point of view differently than I did, as it exaggerated the autumnal colors as though it was an evening rather than 3:30 in the afternoon like it was. I continued walking without stopping until I came to the oak. The tides were high, and I felt more at a distance from the oak than I often do, as it was sitting there like it was floating on the sea surface and out of reach. The sun that was now getting lower tinted the water with a mixture of grey and orange colors that reflected the sky at the distant horizon. I was moving about and realized that a different angle towards the horizon in the west gave a totally different feel for the autumn light, like it was even a different place and time. This made me look closer to the surface of the water to see how the light was playing with it. On my way back, I looked around for more reflections and displays. At one point, I walked off the path towards the sea. The stones at the shore seemed so black in contrast to the blue water, and I was also taken by the variety of blue colors moving about, something I felt the camera did not fully capture. Hence, the camera's role is to capture a moment rather than to let it live. I went to the path again and noticed how the long shadows from a small tree stretching over the path. I wondered if I have even noticed this rather insignificant plant before on my regular walks. This is how the lightscapes of autumn make one differently aware of the surroundings. Different seasons reveal different things. When back home, the sun coming through the windows blinded me and the room felt warm. So I decided to sit on the balcony to enjoy the last moments of the sunshine, as it would not last much longer. Like always during these transitions from day to night and vice versa, the garden was full of sounds from my neighbors, the singing blackbirds. The sun was playing in between the branches of the trees and making reflections of my house on the back of the house in front of me. The day was fading out, but I felt good after having spent the afternoon walking with light and seeing with light and tangled up with the atmospheres and the lightscapes of the autumn. Thank you.
Thank you, Catherine, for taking us on that wonderful journey. That was fabulous. Now I'm going to invite the Living with SAD research team to make their presentation. I'll hand over to Hester. Thank you, Hester.
Okay. Well, I'll just share my slides as well. I'm speaking to you from Glasgow in Scotland, where timeanddate.com tell us that we have around 9.5 hours of daylight just now because the clocks have changed. And we're experiencing different gradations of twilight, night, and sunrise. We're heading into the darkest time of the year, at least the period of least light until December 21st and the winter solstice. Now at this stage, I'm probably teaching my grandmother to suck eggs or informing the already informed. But I start with this sun graph, not because I'm expert in the calculations that time and date are, and please don't ask me about that, but because the clock change and the availability of light is important to our research project. For us, this sun graph could also be a marker of our collective mood, perhaps more particularly for some people who are particularly sensitive to either excess light or excess dark. So why does light affect our lives in terms of health and well-being? Well, light reaches us in units of an illumination we call lux, and we get more or less lux depending on where we are. To make this seem tangible, we can contrast a candle that throws out a small amount of lux, maybe 1 unit, whereas standing in direct sunlight can deliver up to 100,000 lux. If we look at the places where we usually spend time in the global north, and that's indoor environments, we can see that there's not a lot of lux to go round. School classrooms might have only 250 according to this chart. Supermarkets, 750, even if they have more windows and bright artificial lights. Our family living rooms deliver a pitiful 50 lux units. Why does this matter? Well, it probably matters differently at different times of year. In summer, when we have abundant daylight and are outside more, we probably get our lovely lux in good amounts, and the figures bandied about for mental health are 10,000 lux plus. That's thought to be beneficial to mood. But in the winter, we're outside less and in these indoor environments, so we might find ourselves in deficits. And we know that some people are negatively affected by lack of light, particularly at this time of year when there's lack of available daylight. So what happens when we're in deficit of lux for some people is very significant. It can result in persistent low mood, depression, or what we call seasonal affective disorder. So this preamble contextualises our UK ESRC research project about living with seasonal affective disorder, living with SAD. And our central purpose in this project is to help people rethink their relationship to winter and winter light. We're an interdisciplinary research team, cultural geographers informed by geohumanities and interested in the relationship between light, place and mental health, psychiatrist and an artist poet. Myself and Hayden are the geographers, and we're lucky today to be joined by Alec Finley, our artist poet. And we'll take it in turns today to brief you on some of basic contours of our research and its outcomes. So what do we mean by SAD? Well, it's a seasonal state already marked by low mood or depression for some at a time when there's low light, as we've already said. For many, it's very marked in winter, and particularly at the moment as the clocks go back. This is a label that many clinicians are wary of, and we acknowledge the contestation about the category. But the general public seem happy to use this term to reflect their psychological and somatic relationships with the winter light, and therefore so are we. People experiencing some kind of SAD have told us that they feel more tired, experience low mood, they often are socially isolated in the winter, life can seem more of a struggle. In our project, we've combined social science methods, CBT mood survey, and poetic creative practice. And our research has collated rich insights into SAD feelings. You can see from the slide some of the profound personal effects of low light in winter. Some of the people we've worked with communicate feelings about being half the person they are. Low mood covering them up like a blanket at certain times of year. Low mood affecting the quality of relationship. The feeling that there's hardly any life, any quality of life outside the basics of getting by. In work, people struggle to concentrate. At home, they struggle to socialise. These are profound and destabilising effects when they happen every year, and so we can understand why people come to dread the season. To get further into the life worlds of SAD, we recruited 20 brave volunteers to journey with us across a series of creative workshops in one winter to experiment around a big idea. We wanted to rethink SAD and rethink winter for people with SAD. We wanted to respond to the express need for something else, notably for the people in the west of Scotland and in Glasgow, where the winter skies are often overcast, the light is low, and the weather is, well, something you just weather. As one of our workshop participants eloquently put it, I want to be able to winter well. We live here, we live in a country which will be grey a lot of the time, and we've got to find a way that helps us get us through. So our research was an experiment that encouraged the ideas that winter can be different. And I'm going to hand over to Hayden now to explain more.
Thanks, Hester. And so what we're going to do now is just take you inside our Wintering Well programme, which, as this slide lets you know, was an arts-led intervention which encouraged our participants to enter into some new everyday winter light encounters and forms of appreciation. And if you just click on a slide, Hester, that will be grand, thanks. So the workshops that we organised were held in a couple of locations in Glasgow, and we held them so that they had both indoor and outdoor dimensions. They took place across afternoons, and they were, I think, quite purposefully staged as inclusive, accessible, and quite steadily paced events. We tried to ensure that we were mindful of the differing needs, differing backgrounds, and differing personal histories of our participants. If you just click on again, Hester. This slide gives you a sense of some of the different thematics that we alighted on. Each of the little orange boxes here gives a sense of a particular theme that we explored in our programme of workshops. And whilst it might seem concrete now when we ourselves look back at the slides with these 6 themes, it's worth reflecting on the fact that this was a creative experiment. We genuinely didn't quite know how these things would go. We didn't have a sense of each of the themes necessarily as something that would cohere, something that people would feel comfortable working with. But we were very fortunate actually in managing to identify things that people actually used as a catalyst for their own journey and discovery. So we have here the 6 themes, which were my patch of winter sky, my kind of winter place, my sense of self in winter, and Hester's flicked on a slide, and she flicked on again. And if you can just pop back, Hester, thank you. I'll take you inside 3 of these just to give you a flavour of them. And you're still moving them around, Hester. Can you move on one? Thank you. So my patch of winter sky was an exercise based around a very normal and ordinary device. We equipped everyone with a little picture frame. In actual fact, it's a picture frame, or if someone wants to fashion their own sky frame, they can do it with the back of a breakfast cereal box. The frame was a device to enable and invite people to develop a new relationship with the sky above their head. There's a tendency during winter time for eyes to be downcast, to focus on pavement and puddles. The sky frame is a very simple means to get folks to tilt up their chin and look at the sky above their head, take in the different colours, tones, hues of the sky, to realise actually that it isn't something that is just grey, murky and uniform. And as this quotation here from one of our participants attests, what that actually opened up was the possibility of the sky becoming something that's actually relatable, rather than something that you have a non-relationship with. So that was one of our little creative devices, and the patch of winter sky that people were invited to have a relationship with was actually something that they began to take ownership of, so that they would return with their frame to the same patch of sky across the winter. And that was a positive intervention. Next slide, Hester. Keep control of that finger now. There we go. And so this one, socializing my sad self, was an exercise really in trying to ensure that sad is not an isolating set of symptoms. We found that people felt real vindication and justification in sharing their experience, and realizing actually that they were not alone in having the experiences regularly and chronically across winters. The recognition that other people felt the same, of course, is a very powerful thing. And so we have someone here on the testimonial on the slide just acknowledging the importance and the significance of that socialization. The socialization, of course, came through the initial mechanism of our workshop, but that then led to sharing conversations with other members of family who previously hadn't really been confided in, with friends, and extending further into the workplace, where colleagues at work or line managers and bosses became people that some of our participants felt more comfortable sharing their lived experience of SAD with. And generally speaking, that was very positive. And next slide, Hester. And our third little snapshot, taking you inside one of our thematics, is my kind of winter place. Now, if the general direction of travel of our workshops was to invite and encourage our participants to spend just a little more time out of doors, then we also wanted to acknowledge that on some occasions, at certain points in the winter, there are limits which mean that people simply find it too much of a struggle to cross that threshold. And so in part, we invited people to think about designing a winter place of their own indoors as much as finding a place for themselves outdoors. That threshold is a permeable one, but it can also be a barrier. And so getting our participants to think about what might be done positively inside, as well as finding places for themselves to hang out just a little outside, was also a really positive way for us to work together. And next slide.
I think there's a slight delay on it, so.
And so all of that work is then represented in the three outcomes that are public-facing outcomes from our project. So many of the thematics that I've just described for you, and more besides, are encompassed in our guidebook to wintering well, entitled Light is a Right. It contains lots of the tips and prompts based on creative practices for winter time. You'll hear a little more about that from Alec, who's going to read from the manifesto element of our guide. Also illustrated on the slide here is our Wintering Together toolkit, which is designed for people who would like themselves to organise and run Wintering Well workshops. So rather than working on an individual basis, we're also looking to share our resources with people who are actually interested in becoming little self-starting organisers. And so the Wintering Together toolkit is designed for those that would like to create their own groups. And finally, we have a resource created with our project partners, Living Life to the Full, and that is a set of CBT-led resources for individuals to follow as an online program. So those are the three resources. And then if we just click on, I think the key messages coming out of our project are that Wintering Well as a program and the resources we produced are certainly nothing that would constitute a cure for seasonal affective disorder, but they are a series of positive and creative interventions with the emphasis on socialising SAD and encouraging people to think about ways to mitigate against its effect as a place-based process. And finally, just acknowledging the fact that there is elasticity and flexibility in the resources that we've created, such that individuals can find their own path rather than us creating something uniform. And with that, I shall hand over to Alec, and Alec has the lovely task of just offering us some of the content from the book itself. So over to you, Alec.
Thank you, everyone. When we face the harshness of North, stuck in a cold spell that seems to say, life is fleeting, things must die, with another seemingly infinite winter to traverse. Let's have faith the gloom contains not just enough light to renew our resilience, to rise with the sun, or hold back its setting, to dare to invite the day to stay a wee bit longer, to revert to goblin mode, to hang with Lo-Fi Girl all evening, sharing a sofa wallow in the unending drizzle of her Spotify. We can take comfort in the scarf someone crocheted for the park railings, the unexpected carols called in at the window, or laugh at a new poem which begins, winter shit in it. We can breathe scents of eucalyptus, lavender, sprinkle garam masala, squeeze citrus, and learn to play by the Yule rules. Less is, rest is, plans are, even a feast can be, and it's all true for me, for you, for others, that there is hope, which we have only to imagine, because having hope is an act of imagination. We can enact gestures of self-care, see them gather round us, become something more, something tangible, something lasting, noting each point where the sun enters our home, shining pools of comfort, choosing a room for reading, framed in the window pane, with a paper cut outline proving that shadows are shapes which are always moving. A room that cheekily borrows some light from the neighbours. A room settling the sunset over the church tower again and again and again. A room for dreaming in, a bath of sound lit with floating candles. A room for the sun's promised return when it's time. A room for our solaire, which is a mirror in which we can imagine rising embers, starlit cafes, wee shelters lined with colourful leaves to coorie doon in, or walks to the woolier parts of the garden, tutted with fronds and improvised bowers. Even if it does rain, the water go, the rainbow, will make us a cover filled with colour, shining the perfect moment to picture the light that we desire, inviting us to meet the golden hour under a wide blue sky with a kiss or an embrace, and together state out loud, light is a right. Light is a right. We want our Warmarsh benches. Light is a right. We want our sit-outeries and stargazer recliners. Light is a right. We want our streets lined with sad lamps and sunflowers. Light is a right. We want high places, long views, and far, far horizons. Light is a right. We want guerrilla plantings, urban crofts, and glamorous night buses. Light is a right. We want their fire, and their fire, and their fire to be our fire. Light is a right because, winter, you make the frostbite, the colours vibrate, and you force us to feel intensely. Light proves we're never alone. Light makes our vulnerabilities a promise of warmer, brighter homes. A seasonal recalibration of labour, flexible working hours, and even, just imagine, a Scotland that's fit for its weather for everyone. Give me the ginkgo that sheds an arc of gold on the lawn. Give me a blaze to burn winter's trash in a flaming beacon and heap of ash. Give me the sad lamp in the attic. Give me solidarity, a flash of light in the dark. Give me a green leaf clinging on through bare winter. Give me spring, which has a plan. Give me green buds there before you notice. Give me the day when the borderless canopies are birdsong into innumerable tufted territories. Give me broken clouds, steer them so some sun falls on my eyes. Give me a postcard pinned on the empty notice boards in the park. Give me the courage to say, hello, hello there, to make the path feel safer at night. Give me huddled elbows that spread like spindly branches. Give me a hug. Give me the choice to be creative in small ways. And who wouldn't want that? Give me the joy of meeting the light in your eyes, which fill me with lightness. Give me the grace to rest and, from time to time, to give in. Give me the moon as a wise companion. Give me back my synchronicity with the sunrise. Give me the sun, source of our senses, to shine me away. Give me friends, places to share, and a hideaway to be inward. Somewhere I feel safe, reflected, authentic. Somewhere to listen, to hear, to recognize and be recognized. Give me the sounds of laughter set free. Help me, help us, help one another weather life better. Thank you all. I'll
Just by way of closing, Alec, it might be worth us also letting our audience know that all of the words that you used there were a creative composition born of your very careful listening and compiling of contributions from all of our participants across the Wintering Well programme. And so in that sense, the words of the manifesto that Alex so carefully compiled will speak of a work of co-production. So the manifesto comes from us as a project team, but it also comes absolutely from the participants who were part of our Wintering Well programme across 22-23.
I would just say in terms of that it is a collective act of witness, and I made sure to read it as it progressed at every session. And I think that became a kind of affirmation from people that they could hear their own voice in it. And maybe one other thing that was very interesting is that we did some writing exercises, and some of the material is from them. But I would say that some of the strongest material just came from conversation and overhearing and listening.
Wow. Thank you, Alec, for reading that. It's absolutely fantastic. It's incredible that light inspires such imagination and hopefulness and beauty and sort of mundane imagery as well, which is just as beautiful as the more lyrical kind of imagery. It's just fantastic. Thanks for sharing that. It's brilliant. Sorry, I don't want to butt into your presentation. Do you want to say some more about that?
That's us. We've
Okay.
used our time.
Thank you so much, Hayden, Hester, and Alec. That was fantastic to hear about that project. Love to hear more about it, obviously. And thanks also, Katrin. I think there's quite a few ideas that are coming out of the presentations for me. I would definitely encourage any audience out there, if they would like to ask specific questions to specific people or something more general, please pop it in the chat, because we very much like to have a discussion and be open to answering any questions now and for the next 20 to 30 minutes. So unless anybody on the panel has something they'd like to immediately ask, I suppose I'm just reflecting a little bit, first of all, on the synergies in all the presentations in terms of light and place. And just when Alec was reading The Right to Light, it really struck me that those words were so quite specific, I think, to the location with which you were working, and that, you know, those ideas, whilst light is really universal as a subject, and I think all of us here can relate to the imagery and the experience that Katrin had on her walk, and you know, the experience of the Wintering Well programme. They all seem so location specific, and that there's a real intimacy with place. And I don't know if anybody would be interested to speak to that a little bit.
I'm happy to kick off with some reflections on, if you like, the place specifics of the Living with SAD project. Hester sort of ran through the program of data gathering that the project involved, and whilst the Big SAD survey that we undertook was a nationwide one, where we solicited responses irrespective of people's location and received responses from people right across the UK. When it came to our Wintering Well programme, that, for very practical reasons and logistical reasons, involved people living in Glasgow and Greater Glasgow. But there was also a sense on our part that Glasgow is a particularly rainy place, a particularly wet place, and so climatically, we're certainly dealing with people that were well weathered, and it was also our sense that we might actually be able to use that to some degree, that Glasgow's own and to the west of Scotland's own sense of itself and its own kind of understanding of weather and conditions and culture certainly played a part, I think, in the overall kind of spirit and ethic in which things happened. Having said that, there was a diversity to our group. So not everyone actually was, if you like, born and bred a Glaswegian. We had international participants who were part of the group too. And some of their experience was born of actually having moved to Glasgow and having been taken by surprise, often in a negative sense, by exactly the kind of weather and the winter that they were encountering. So I think there was place specificity, but there was also, if you like, a quite useful cross-cultural dimension to some of our experiences too, where Glaswegians learn from the experiences of others coming from other parts of the world.
Could I just add to that? I think what you both said is right in terms of place and city landscape. I think that also the group was very important, almost as a collective space. And as people were coming into the group and knowing each other and feeling safe, I think that became quite a radical space of self-care, collective care, witness. And so what was happening in the room, and we did take quite a lot of care about the room itself and the kind of relationships between people, seemed to me personally to be as strong as the obvious questions of geography, the sky, the city. There was something about the collective endeavor that I felt very strongly in terms of, Jo, you used the phrase about gathering a vocabulary. I think the vocabulary became much richer. And when you were collecting that perhaps in a village, that's a place, but it's also a group of people.
I'll just add to that. I think the strength of feeling we witnessed in the group, what we call in another, in perhaps our academic publication, the biosociality that kind of emerged around SAD, is partly so strong, not only because of the wonderful care that Alec and Hayden was taking off, and all the team were taking off the people in the room, but also because of the difficulty of expressing the difficult feelings around SAD, culturally maybe in a place like Scotland. And this is a bit of a controversial thing maybe to say, but there are some people who commented in our interviews and in our surveys, and perhaps this is something we access slightly differently as a research team, that there may be kind of rather stoic kind of winter cultures that are present in west of Scotland, and it may be different, similar in other contexts, where actually weathering the weather is part of the kind of the cultural expectation of what we are meant to do in particular places. And when one finds that really difficult, then it's difficult to share that weakness and share that vulnerability, and to be brought together with people who feel similarly but can't quite speak it in other spaces was really powerful. So that is like kind of allowing a particular new narrative of how it is to live on this particular land and with this particular geography and with this particular light that perhaps isn't allowed in other spaces outside our kind of project. So I think that was part of the power of what Alec was really saying there.
That's really fascinating. I wonder if, I don't know, Katrin, if you'd like to say something about that. I noted, I think one of the lines in Alec's poem was seasonal recalibration of labour, if I remembered that rightly. And when I was in Iceland, I don't know, you're an Icelander, Katrin, so you'll know much more about this. But in Seyðisfjörður, there seemed to be, people would say that in the summer, and I noticed it when we were there, they were up all night and they were very busy, kind of working all hours, getting all kinds of jobs done. And then as the winter approached, there was a slowing down and a kind of almost a welcoming of the winter and an acknowledgement of how their lives were about to change quite radically, and a kind of embracing of that, which, Hester's sort of bringing to the fore that not everybody embraces the lack of light and the seasonal change in those ways. And yet, from my perspective, I couldn't see people who are having a real problem with it. But I don't know about your experience, Katrin, what your experience is.
I think it depends very much on people. It's remarkable because I have, a few years ago, I was actually studying darkness and writing papers about embracing darkness and seeing the light in darkness. And personally, I hate it. I came home early today to take part in this webinar, knowing that when it's over, it will be pitch dark outside and it's rainy and I haven't got my reflectors and I'm scared of walking outside without reflectors. But some people do not relate to this at all. But I feel like, Seyðisfjörður, like the fjords in the east and the west of Iceland, where you do not get any sunlight from the middle of November because of the high mountains. Actually, the sun doesn't actually reach over them. I think it is maybe much more because the contrasts are so sharp. Maybe it's much more integrated into their kind of the calendar, the calendar of people. And you hear about this sun cafes in many towns in Iceland, at least three of them that have it. But some people don't care and like the artificial lights of Christmas, for example, and I cannot relate to that. So I think it's very personal, but I also think it has to do with, like in the autumn, I think that everybody tends to go outside the city on a sunny day to look at the colors of the vegetation as it is changing. So it's kind of some rituals that some people have in relation to this. I don't know if I answered the questions well enough, but
yeah, it's interesting how people cope. There is a question to the panelists. Thank you to the panel members. Are there distinct psychological and physiological benefits to interacting with daylight and sky from indoors through a window compared to interacting with them outdoors? That's an interesting question. Who wants to tackle that?
I'll have a first go at it, Jo, but also just to note, there's a bunch of questions in the Q&A box as well, yes, as well as, because we've got the webinar chat box and then the other box besides.
Oh, thank you, thank you.
I'm not sure necessarily that we would make any physiological distinction. But it's certainly the case that we encouraged people to look at engaging and encountering the sky both indoors and outdoors, and partly that was born of an acknowledgement that individuals might have their own specific capacities and their own particular limits, and that might actually change on a day-to-day basis or from day to day, whether someone has the oomph to manage to get outside, and if they don't, then actually spending time at a window was, if that was what they could do, then that was certainly something that we encouraged. We have one of our participant group who continues to use their sky frame at a window in their house. And so in some senses, it's really about individuals trialing and experimenting themselves. But Reem, I wouldn't necessarily say that we were seeking to make any psychological or physiological distinction between the two.
I just would add, maybe one thing we did think about was decorative architecture. And we used examples like the solaire, a kind of medieval idea of a room with light. And we encouraged people to decorate, use candles, lights, tinsel, and then actually more to report back to us. So rather than specifically windows, what I remember was them thinking of the light quality of the room in relationship to when light is generous out of doors. So how could they recover and renew light when there was a lack of it? So it wasn't so much quite about window as, to me, it was maybe more room as environment. And we talked about indoors, outdoors. I think that's what I remember.
Yeah, so it's maximizing the available light into the room, but also kind of reflecting light and creating other sorts of kind of light affects in the room, and as part of a wider noticing of light, you know, both indoor and outdoor. So it's just about an orientation. So you may, you know, many of our participants may really kind of have you know, profound effects of SAD, but actually not really think about light very much, but just kind of experience the lack of light, and shifting that as a mindset was kind of critical. So yeah, okay, maximizing our late daylight by going out, that's great, through these kind of creative practices that we were playing with, but also, yeah, thinking about how we reflect and orientate around light and different sorts of light in interiors were absolutely what we're trying to do. So yeah, I think both Alec and Hayden are absolutely right there.
And interestingly, maybe not always just to increase the scientific quantity of light, but almost to change the way you're living in your house.
Yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
so we're not measuring as such, you know, we're not measuring. I mean, there was a psychological measure from our psychiatrist partner who did mood surveys around kind of these kind of interventions, but we're not measuring kind of physiological benefit, but, you know, talking with people about what works and thinking about how they manage kind of creative practice around interior light design and things as part of a multiple responses to SAD.
I think that is often referred to this Danish practice of hyggesij, when in the winter, when you turn on candles, and that is one thing that many people that I know that really like winter, is that you can't do that in the winter. You put candles everywhere, and you have a hot cup of tea and the read book, and kind of get yourself through the winter by doing that, and it's something, yeah. So you make your own light.
That's nice. That answers the question in a way. What are some coping strategies individuals with SAD can implement during the darker months? I think you've all kind of spoken to that a little bit. There's a really nice comment. What a wonderful, rich and poetic session, just to pop that in there. Another question, does the time change worse than the conditions? Should we keep summertime or wintertime?
Should we keep summertime or wintertime? It's interesting, isn't it? Yeah, I don't know. Sorry, Katrin, were you speaking?
Yeah, I was just thinking, because it's very debated in Iceland, and I don't really know how they're going to do it, but for me, I mean, I think that they're talking about the time is wrong in Iceland, and it is true for the the, how in terms of how it's located. But the winter is just dark, so I cannot see if it does change anything.
Katrin, do you know about this Association for a Sunnier Society in Iceland?
Yeah, I know about it, yes.
I heard that some years ago there was they proposed a bill to institute super summertime, didn't they? To reintroduce daylight savings. So since 1968, the clocks have not been put back after the summer. Is that right?
Yeah.
So in a sense, Iceland is kind of trialing this suggestion, this idea, but it was rejected by the parliament, wasn't it? So
it was, and partly because it would put out, now we are 1 hour. We are 1 hour before Europe, and in the winter it's often 2 or 3 hours we are dealing with, depending on where people are. So this would actually make this time frame different. So kind of for political and reasons of management and things like that, this actually kind of will disrupt kind of global communications, if we can say so. So that is why, but I don't know. I haven't got an opinion on that, really.
Yeah, it's an interesting idea, though, because people are thinking about it, clearly. There's another thought here, which is interesting. This is going back to the chat for a moment. Thanks for some really interesting talks. We've heard from 2 places, Iceland and the west coast of Scotland. One winter light difference between the 2 is snow. When speaking to those living in areas of very little winter light, I've often heard that the snow helps them to cope, both from its reflection of what light is available, but also brings contrast to the landscape. Any thoughts?
Exactly. That's definitely what it does. Snow is very important, but then snow in itself is not always very nice to deal with, exactly when it's kind of changes into a slippery ground and so on. But yeah, it lights up.
There's a lovely question here. Are there any lessons anyone's learned from how other species adapt to the particular light atmosphere in their area?
Not sure about that question, Jo, but I'll come back to the one on snow. And this is to some degree anecdotal, but from conversations with researchers interested in seasonality and its effects on people's lived experience in Scandinavia, there is a sort of growing interest in what happens when winter is no longer as snowy. And of course, climate change is one of the reasons for winters being less snowy and for there being less sustained periods of snow cover. And so the world of climate change projection, of course, is one where all sorts of speculation open up. But if we allowed ourselves just a moment of speculation, then it might be actually that the west of Scotland becomes a little bit of a trailblazer for understanding the experience that could then become one more common in other parts of Northern Europe, where snow cover once was the case and can no longer be expected to the same degree. So that's some of the conversations we've had where Scandinavians have actually been looking to Scotland to say, well, talk us through your experience of wintertime when there isn't snow, and what does that then do in terms of people's mental health and well-being?
Yeah, and I think that's borne out in the literature to some extent. So, there's an assumption that the further north you go, the more sad you are, and that isn't actually the case. And I think Hayden has a great phrase about this. It's not latitude but attitude, and so it's the kind of cultural orientations to winter and not just snow glare, I guess, that really does kind of have a really important role in kind of how we perceive winter, but that kind of cultural infrastructure around people embracing winter, and that's very different to here, I think. So maybe Scandinavians have an advantage in that they have actually less reported You know, to some extent, there's a contestation about whether SAD exists with some research in Norway and other Scandinavian countries, but with climate change, exactly as Hayden says, that this may be shifting. So it's a really interesting question in that way.
I think one of the things I observed from the participants was there are things that we can't change, like the clocks or whether there's snow or not. But the ones who progressed most, and in a way they all embraced this, chose to live their days slightly differently. And when they took up some of the activities we suggested to do with walking at particular times when there was light available, or going to a tree, or going to a park, or choosing their own special places, I think they began to find what I would call the generative quality of creative adaptation, that they began to feel more in a caring control of their own life. So rather than being stressed out about the clock that is defined by the government, they were trying to rethink their own day and what they did in the day and when they did it. And the utopian aspect of the project was very much to imagine taking that further. So for me, the project began around the vulnerability of people with SAD, but actually its natural outcome was to radically remodel Scotland using their knowledge. That although they are vulnerable, they actually have some of the best perceptions about living with low winter light.
Mm.
But that was one of the very interesting things about working in a collective active witness, that it goes beyond the singular, what you might call coping with suffering or overcoming. That wasn't really an overcoming project. It was a creative adaptation, releasing quite radical political possibilities. Like at one moment, people would redesign their whole neighborhood. And we consciously invited them to do that. So not just staying with the individual person and their problem, but saying, well, how would you change the whole city? And that was really exciting.
So contributing to the planning, the urban planning, and that's something that struck me, maybe just continuing on from that thought, thinking about technology and analog kind of ways of dealing with seasonal change or less light. Because of course, when I was talking about the Polaria project, which is years ago now, thinking about virtual daylight systems and simulating daylight, which, you know, many companies have, you know, have successfully done that. It's notable that Catherine and your project, the Wintering Well program, was looking at more embodied kind of ways of dealing with or experiencing light in the landscape. And I found that very hopeful in a sense, because I think thinking about climate change and adaptation, as you say, Alec, you know, we have to not rely on electricity so much, and that all those kind of solutions. So this idea of embracing the light that is there, but perhaps adapting your day so that you get out early in the morning and you get as much light as you can. It's sort of interesting. So I suppose my ramble is kind of thinking about technology versus analog, and picking up on that from the presentations, really.
Yeah, that's interesting. And I think obviously there's probably lots of technical solutions to the kinds of difficulties we're talking about, sad lamps being just one of them. And there's really innovative tech that's out there to sort of reflect light in urban environments. And I do believe that's part of an interesting kind of urban design conversation. But in a sense, it's also maybe a question of us kind of realizing what some call their, our light nutrition needs, if you like, and building that into our lives and our infrastructures of employment and having to use the phrase, of the manifesto, light is a right. What does it really mean to organise our lives around that collectively, not just for those with SAD, but in our kind of collective futures, where the available light will be less as climate change brings warmer and wetter weather. That means that there's more cloud cover, there's going to be less light, and so there may be kind of population mental health effects that we haven't quite anticipated. So thinking about light as a right for how we organise our working day, for example, so that we have a right to ask, actually, I want to come in later because I want my morning light walk, or I want to break at this time of day to maximise my looks today, and actually sort of begin to educate each other in order to be able to organise that and almost have like employment rights around daylight, which I think is a really interesting suggestion.
Maybe offer another aspect of our recent activities, Jo, in response to your question, and Hester flagged it up just by her brief mention there of therapeutic sad lamps. Now that wasn't really part of our project activities up until very recently, because we were interested in the socializing of our creative practices and trialing the different ways in which we could create these, as Alec put it, creative adaptations. But right now, we're actually working in partnership with a local library service in Greater Glasgow. And what we're doing is putting together or partnering our research project with the library service. That library service last year trialled a scheme where they had static sad lamps inside libraries, where people could go in for a little bit of light nutrition. They could book themselves in. That trial was successful in the sense that it worked for the people that were able to access the library, but it also had some limits in terms of its accessibility and inclusivity. So what we've done this winter is create Wintering Well boxes, which contain our guide to wintering well alongside a mini sad lamp. And that box is then something that library users can loan and take away with them. And so in East Dunbartonshire, as of last week, there are 100 of these Wintering Well boxes, which are quite interesting in that they will kind of pair together the psychological and the physiological dimensions of sad intervention. What will be interesting for us is finding out how effective that is as a package, if you like.
I want to say in terms of, because there's really not, if you have to go to work in the morning in Iceland, there's no, like in December or late November, there is no choice but walking into work in a pit, in a darkness. And about 3 years ago, I think I was in a webinar that was organized by Tim Edensor because of a book that had just come out. And what I did was differently than the paper I came now, but slightly similar, is that I recorded my walk to work. And what I noticed so strongly, I had often thought about it, but one of the things I noted so strongly was that the lights, the street lights sometimes are not actually made for people to guide it. They are, for example, they lit up buildings and they blind you. And at least I'm talking about Iceland and Reykjavik. So when, in some cases, when thinking of, kind of lighting up the darkness outside in terms of, in the cityscape, it's actually, they're actually making things worse than not. And yeah, so it's a kind of a, yeah, I think that there's no consciousness about, little consciousness about that actually lighting in the winter should actually be there to comfort you and help you rather than working against you. You know, people are more important than buildings and car parks, really.
It's the quality of the light, isn't it?
Yeah.
The quality of the light also, not just the right to light, but the right to a good quality of light. There is a question here which maybe we might finish on because it's a completely different question. It says, I wonder what will be the trend in extreme southern latitudes, so sad south. And I suppose that's something that none of us have necessarily considered, but it's nevertheless a very interesting question. I don't know if anybody wants to have a quick thought about that before we start to close up. Or maybe that will be the next research project.
Yeah, I think a lot of the research is probably from the global north, and it's really interesting. But you know, I think, yeah, a good lit review would give us some of the answers to that. And so I'd have to go and consult my notes, but I definitely think it would be a really interesting kind of project and something that needs doing. And obviously we're all globally experiencing many different kind of seasons now, and seasonal shifts. And so anything that we took as truths previously are on the move. And so our kind of seasonal affect in general, and our relationship with light globally is perhaps in question now with climate change. So I think these are really important questions. So we have to think differently about our geographies of sad and geographies of light.
It doesn't quite answer the question, but what I'm interested in is setting up these, what you might call patient-led acts of witness for any illness or condition or situation anywhere in the world. And so the simple act of bringing a various group of people together who can describe it, give one another faith that it's not just happening to them, and then move forward from that to take their description into change is actually relevant to every single illness, disease, and context. So that's what I took away from it. It was a model project for me in that sense. Even when you take away SAD, the methodology would be applicable. And I just wanted to say the book's available free online. Just Google it and you can get a digital copy just by looking up Light is a Right, and you'll find it.
Fantastic. Thank you, Alec. There'll be lots of people clicking away.
You can also buy a copy from Alec if you want a hard copy. He should let people know.
And Alec does make the most beautiful publications, and so maybe before you click on the freebie, go and check out the probably limited edition beautiful version.
Well, I now get orders for the SAD book at this time of year, which is quite interesting in terms of my economics. They start to pick up in October as people begin to plan. And it's quite interesting to have a book that is specific,
seasonal
to a season.
Yeah, lovely idea. And on that, I'm going to say thank you so much to the panel. I feel like the conversation's only just got started. And there are so many important things to take away from this. The light as a right, definitely, light justice for everyone. And maybe the next panel we will think about other than humans as well, because that's a hugely important area, which I think Katrin really made me think about a lot with that amazing sculpture. So thank you, everyone, and go well into the night and into the dark, and have a wonderful winter. And thank you, everybody.
Very much. Thank you.
Thanks, Jo, and thanks the Daylight Academy for organising things. Much appreciated.
Thank you
And
very much.
before we finish, I'm just going to do one little bit of housekeeping. I hope you'll just bear with me for a second. I would just like to highlight the next Daylight Awareness Week event, which is Daylight, the Unknown Priority in Urban Planning. It's a panel discussion on the 1st of November, 12 till 1:30 Central European Time. It's online and it's also in person. So there's no registration, but you can get the details from the Daylight Academy website. And also back to this very important issue of how we can ensure universal and equitable access to daylight. If you'd like to join the online forum and share any solutions that you might have for more daylight justice, again, we'd love to hear from you. So you can use this QR code that's on the screen or pop along to the Daylight Academy. And thanks very much.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks again. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.